This book right here, this is how I got a book deal after a 3-house major publisher auction. Okay, that came off really braggy, but like hopefully I got your attention. Clickbait. Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and welcome back to my channel. You have asked, and I, being a benevolent lord, am here to gift you what you want. If you've been around my channel for any amount of time, you probably know that I swear by this lovely writing craft book, The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. I do a lot of analysis of writing craft books on this channel where I've talked about this, and it still, after reading 15 plus craft books, is my favorite. And I've received so many comments over the years asking if I would go over this book because it is a little dense, showing you guys specifically how I use it and implement it in my books. If you're interested more in general, how I outline or brainstorm my novels before I start writing, all of the pre-work that I do have multiple videos, actually an entire playlist where I go over my writing processes, and you can check that out if you're more interested in just like a general idea. But in this video, we're gonna deep dive into this book, and I'm gonna go over the 4 most important chapters, in my opinion, and how I implement them. But first of all, let's chat about why this is my favorite book and why I think every writer should at least pick it up. In my opinion, this is the most in-depth craft book on the market. Unlike most craft writing books whose aim is to take a novice and turn them into a good writer, this book already assumes you are a good writer and wants to take you to the level of an expert. It is going to give you the basics, but it is also going to dive really, really deep. Instead of 101 stuff, you're going to get like 401 collegiate level learning here. And let's be real. It's pretentious. It's thick. It's dense. I understand why people can't get through it. The thing about all writing craft books is that they're prescriptive, right? They're like, this works for me, so you should do it and it'll work for you. And I don't subscribe to that. I think that you should take as much out of this book and out of this video as you want. Leave the rest, ignore the rest, or evolve what ideas there might be present in this video or this book and put your own spin on it. I love this book. It's my favorite, but I don't follow it to a T. And it's okay if you don't do that. Also, I just want to add here too, I'm only covering, like I said, 4 chapters out of this book. You should still read this. I'm not covering every single little tiny detail, even in the 4 chapters that I'm going over. This video is like supplemental education. It's not inclusive, if that makes sense. Also, I'm not really trying to teach you anything. Like I'm literally just reading the things that I think are important that he says and then showing you how I use them. But enough prologue. Let's go ahead and dive right in to how I use Anatomy of Story. So you got an idea, whether it's for a character, a plot, a setting, even a theme you want to explore, and you think you might have a story idea for a book. Chapter 2, the premise section, is all about developing that idea, taking your first inkling of a story and developing it into a Pulitzer Prize winner. There are 11 main points in this chapter, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go over each of them, tell you what Truby explains them to mean, and then I'm gonna show you how I personally implement them. So this whole point of this chapter is developing the premise, the general one-line sentence that tells the reader what this book is about. For example, with my debut novel, The Glass Witch, the premise of the story is a chubby little angry witch must join a Halloween-themed pageant in order to rid the town of a vicious witch hunter. Another example that Truby uses is Star Wars. So the premise of Star Wars is when a princess gets in danger, a man goes to rescue her, and in the process saves the galaxy. You need a premise or you need a log line because it's the easiest way to sell your book to someone when you're just chatting with them. Now, I don't personally worry about this step until I have figured out like a lot more about my characters and my plot. But if you're starting here, that's totally fine too. So you've got one little measly idea that you want to turn into a book, and you're like, okay, what's my premise based on this one thing that I know I want to write about? The best place to start a wish list. Write down everything that you want to write about, all of the tropes you like, all of the character dynamics you think are fun, any plot twists or reveals that speak to you, anything that you think would really make your story pop or that you get really passionate about when you read in another book, jot that down. While doing this, you could also start to ask yourself what if questions. Like, what if a chubby girl had to join a beauty pageant in order to defeat the evil? Given your list, twist and your what if questions, it's always really good to know as well the pitfalls that could come from any of these tropes or archetypes you're playing with. Jotting down some questions. Say for example, you really want to write about time travel. It might be helpful to spend some time writing down some pitfalls you might fall into with this. Like, where could there be plot holes if I do choose to write a time travel story? Next, there's this idea that really confuses a lot of people, and I totally understand why. When making my notes for this video, I was like, I had to read the chapter like 7 times to figure out what was happening. It's called the designing principle, and it's basically another 1-sentence logline that is like a strategy for your plot and characters. I honestly think this part of the book is needlessly complicated, and really it's just theme meets structure. But in essence, how to write your own designing principle is theme meets the structural format that you choose to tell the story in. So for example, again, with the glass switch, the designing principle would be a girl has 24 hours format to save her town by learning she is worthy of her family. Another example that Truby uses in the book is for the Christmas Carol. The premise for this is when an old stingy man is visited by 3 ghosts, he regains the spirit of Christmas. The designing principle, however, is trace the rebirth of a man, which is the theme, by revisiting that man's past, present, and future. That's the format. It's kind of silly and it's so complicated for no reason. Honestly, I feel like you can skip this step, but that's just me. Now you're doing all of these steps kind of concurrently, moving to where you need to whenever an idea strikes. But while all this is happening, it's a really good idea to start thinking about what character would be best to tell this story through. It's not always the most likable character, but it is the most complex or interesting or dynamic character. Now, since we're so early in the process, if you have a character you really want to make work, you can always make sure you build them up to be the most dynamic and the most complex. Or if you're starting with a theme or a setting or a plot, just make sure you pick a character that works the best there. It's also a good idea to start brainstorming the idea of your central conflict. What's happening in this story? Who is fighting over what? And that includes some basic action. If you can get a couple scene ideas in your head, maybe where the character starts, where the character ends, or the climax. If you're writing romance, some people get an idea for the first kiss or the 3rd act breakup. In a fantasy book, it might be the training montage. Whatever genre you're writing in, just kind of start thinking about specific scenes. You don't have to do all of them yet, but just having a couple in your head will really get the ball rolling. And then we move on to character change. This is personally my favorite part to develop because both me and Truby very much agree on this. This is the pentacle of your story. Pentacle? Pinnacle? Both. You will summon the enjoyment of the reader by having a good character arc. The basic idea is weakness times action equals character change. How does the act of emotionally struggling with this plot thing lead to overall change? And while we're brainstorming, this plot action that we are going to be creating needs to be the very best plot and the very best pressure for the main character to elicit that change. So you see the plot is going to be very dependent on where you want to take the character arc. So following the weakness meets action equals change example, I'm going to use the glass switch again. So for the weakness, my main character has a feeling of worthlessness. The action is to find 3 potion ingredients to brew a potion that's going to kill the witch hunter. And through this adventure, she is going to learn that she is worthy. Now, I find that working at the end usually is the easiest for me because it's much easier, in my opinion, to write towards a goal than to not know exactly where you're going and where you need to end up. So if you know what change, where you want your character to be at the end of the novel, then you can kind of go back and see who they need to be at the beginning to make that shift the most dramatic and the most dynamic. Another thing to possibly be brainstorming right now is the moral choice. This is the decision at the end of the novel that the main character needs to make, and that kind of portrays the theme of the story to your audience. This usually, but I guess not always, happens around the climax when the main character is presented with this choice to either continue in their weakened state or evolve and become self-actualized, I guess. The example I'm going to use for this one is from Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. So I guess, like, you know, if it's been 15 years and you haven't watched this yet, like, honestly, what are you doing? Like, leave this video and go watch it. It's an amazing trilogy. And yes, the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise is only a trilogy. I will fight to the death over that point. The moral choice for Jack Sparrow at the climax of this trilogy is to either stab Davy Jones' heart and be a free pirate forever, or he can do the selfless thing and let a friend stab the heart, thus saving the friend and doing a selfless act. This choice creates huge tension and conflict because in the beginning of the series, we see how selfish and like about his own business Jack Sparrow is. And then towards the end, choosing to let Will stab the heart instead, we see over the trilogy how much Jack has grown and changed. And last but not least, something that you can brainstorm is audience appeal. Writing for others is really difficult, especially if you're wanting to get into a traditional publishing field where everything is so competitive. There's only so few spots and trends, which are like impossible to predict, basically dictate everything. Therefore, it is most important that you are writing something that you are passionate about and you love. So Truby says to write for yourself first, but always do keep in mind outside thoughts and opinions when you're writing, just because you're writing for yourself, but you're not only writing for yourself. I think like a 70-30 balance is a good one to have. This should mainly be your story, but you can also add in some like themes or tropes or ideas that are really like popping at the moment to maybe like, you know, get agents' attention. Okay. So I've gone over all of the keywords. You know all of the stuff basically from the premise chapter. Now, how do I actually do this? Because while I follow most, if not all, of these steps, I do them in a wildly different order and in a wildly different way. When I first get a novel idea, I keep them all on note cards. I find this so helpful to help organize thoughts. You can actually mix and match them as you want as well. Both my debut novel, The Glass Witch, and my upcoming novel, The Odds, came from me having different ideas on note cards and then playing with them, moving them around and combining them until I had a bunch of themes and characters and plots that just clicked into place and became a novel for me. On these note cards, I don't just keep premises, but also character, setting, plot, tropes, magic systems, whatever I think of, whatever little story embryo comes to me, I jot it down and file it away. This mixing and matching of note cards to me feels very much so like building a wish list and the premise list concept, because these are all things that I'm really passionate about and I really want to explore in my work. And a lot of the ideas I get are sometimes full premises. And then my own take on the what if questions, the possibility questions, is that I just spend a bunch of time from then on out brainstorming and daydreaming about what I want this book to be. I try really hard not to get caught up on one avenue, like I have one thing set in my mind, like I wrote this on my note card, so it is now set in stone and must be in the final draft of the book. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. You want to explore as many avenues as possible. You think you want to go down this one? Okay, well what happens if you go down this one instead? It's a really, really great way to spark ideas. While I'm navigating all of these pathways, this is when I really start to think of what type of character would be best to tell this story and what type of change would really bring about a potent theme. If I'm trying to say something, if I already have my theme figured out at this point, I'm gonna want to come up with some kind of arc that best shows that, like best displays that through my character, so their start and end position will really make that theme pop. Mind you, this whole process for me is like very chaotic. Like the brainstorming process, very chaotic, very all over the place, jumping around, not doing any certain step at once. So it's okay if you are too, is what I'm saying. After I kind of have all of that though decently explored, I'm gonna move on to character. Or if I don't have a theme yet, I also like to move back to characters, because theme and character are so intertwined that I do them back to back or at the same time. I love to daydream about my characters and develop them as much as I can. I love the ridiculously long character questionnaires that ask you questions that probably will never show up in your story, but those questions might spark some ideas that bring about whole plot points or twists or other characters you need to add in. I just really spend a lot of time here because I want my characters to breathe off of the page. I also find that a lot of times while I'm brainstorming the best character for the novel, a lot of side characters come into play. A lot of times this is also when I'll come up with ideas for the antagonist or the villain, because that dynamic between your main character and the villain is the most dynamic relationship on page, right? So as I'm learning more about my character, I'm starting to think how I can kind of shadow that in the antagonist or villain. Once I feel kind of semi-set in my character and my theme, then I start thinking about plot stuff. That's just usually the way my brain works, but a lot of times I will start with a plot idea and do all of these out of order. See what I'm saying? Chaotic. At this point, I am brainstorming ideas of how to weave the plot and the character arc together. This will be discussed in later chapters that we go over in the video, but you should never have one without the other. The character arc and the plot should be so disentangleable that they cannot exist on their own. I'm jotting down ideas, scenes that could possibly bring about that character arc that would really put pressure on my main character that I've already come up with. Or if I've got my theme, what's a good situation to put my character in that would show that theme? What's just like a fun trope or a fun action sequence that I love that has nothing to do with anything, but I want to see if I can work in myself? I jot all these ideas down. Another great thing to do while you're kind of jotting down your plot beat ideas is to watch movies or read books that are similar to what you want to be incorporating yourself. For the Glass Witch, I watched Hocus Pocus. One of the things that I jotted down that I wanted to try was that I really wanted to try writing a novel set in 24 hours. Hocus Pocus is set in 24 hours. So I watched the movie, jotted down the plot beats because I wanted to see the mechanics of the story and how it worked and why I loved it so much and why I wanted to try it. When I finally got into plotting my novel, outlining my novel, it was so much easier. As for audience appeal, I maybe don't spend as much time on this because again, that 70-30 split of writing mainly for yourself and then a little bit for other people, but it is still kind of good to go over. And while I was brainstorming the Glass Witch, there were definitely times when I was like, okay, is there anything like spicy or with some flair that I can like throw in that would just give it that little extra oomph, you know? And it was during one of those times that I was exploring different avenues with this book. I thought of Dumplin' by Julia Murphy because I knew I wanted to write a book about a little girl defeating a big bad witch hunter. You know, I wanted Hocus Pocus but kind of in reverse, where the witches were the good people and the witch hunters were the bad people. But I was like, there needs to be something else. And then I randomly thought of the idea of adding in the whole pageantry idea. And then it was just like from there, so much was sparked. And the pageantry aspect definitely brought a lot of attention to the book because it was dealing with hot issues like body positivity and self-acceptance. A lot of these conversations are happening nowadays. So that really just like worked at the right time. And that is how I use Anatomy of Story to help me develop and brainstorm and get the premise for a book idea. I have went ahead and made the executive decision to split this video in half because it was just getting way too long. So stay tuned for when we go over developing deep characters and exploring the 22 steps of story in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you got something from it. Let me know down in the comments if you actually use any of these things. Like maybe you were implementing them and had no idea that other people were as well. Don't forget that the Glass Witch is available for order wherever books are sold, and the Odds is available for pre-order. She comes out in less than like 3 weeks, which is wild. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.